You're listening to the Australian Hunting and Beyond podcast with Matt, where we talk about hunting, shooting, fishing, camping, and everything else that the great outdoors has to offer. Let's get into it. G'day everyone, a bit of a different episode for you all. Before we get into that, I just wanted to give a big shout out to Blake from the Contract Social app. He was on episode 57 and I just wanted to let everybody know that it is now up and running. So if you haven't heard that episode, go back and have a listen and see how this could be a great little app for managing private access or even lending out your own gear. So in this episode, you're going to hear my presentation after being invited to speak at the Australian Deer Association here in Sydney. I had a fantastic time and it was an absolute pleasure talking to all the members there. I'm still not sure why they asked me, but I can assure you that it's definitely not on the back of my hunting ability. So on that, I thought I would try something a little bit different and we recorded the presentation, which you're going to hear about a bit later. So I thought I'd throw that into the podcast, but before we get into that, I keep talking about advocacy and promoting our outdoor lifestyle and hunting lifestyle and all that. So I thought I'd have someone on who's been an advocate and started up the petition to really talk about what's going on down there in Victoria. So have a listen before we get into the ADA presentation that I did, and I hope you all enjoy. Let's get into it. I am so passionate about advocating for what we have, what we want to keep and the like, and it's great getting the opportunity to talk to people with a similar passion who are out there doing their bit as best they can. So I've got the pleasure of introducing Marcel tonight, who, mate, I'll let you introduce what you've done down there in Victoria and I guess tell the listeners what is going on and what you're trying to do, which is pretty impressive, mate. So firstly, well done. And yeah, let's go for it.
Thanks, Matt. Look, what we're trying to do here is stop aerial culling in areas where licensed deer hunters can hunt, so keep them out of our state forests. It's come from a push. They ramped up their culling in the Western District, which is the area I'm from. We don't have a massive population of deer, so it is hard hunting in the areas where I'm in. So it was really hard hit when they came around with choppers. Like I said, you can go a couple of days without seeing anything if you're really pushing for it. The Victorian Parliament said we needed to get somebody to sponsor our petition. So the Shooters Party stood behind us and helped with that. As it is now, we've just scraped by the first benchmark with signatures to be mentioned in Parliament at the end of the year, the last sitting.
So you actually started prior to getting the Shooter Farmer Fishers Party involved. You started a change.org, I believe. But there is some hurdles with that being recognised. Is that correct?
Yeah, so we started the change.org. It started with me and a friend having a conversation, just, upset with the culling that's happening in this area. The change.org petition grew really fast, but when it drew some attention from the Shooters Union and from the Shooters Party, we got informed that it actually can't stand in front of Victorian Parliament because anybody could sign it basically from anywhere in the world. And we had to use their format, which limits it just to Victorians.
Yeah, okay. Which, look, that does make sense because it's whether you agree or not, I feel that it's a Victorian issue and the Victorian government is looking at Victorians and what they feel on the issue. So I understand where that element comes from. I also would love if it was just opened up to everybody because there's a lot of people from New South Wales that come down there to hunt. So it makes, not just New South Wales, I know South Australian boys that go over, I know Queenslanders, the whole lot. So I understand that. I get where they're coming from and I get why that is needed, but then I also go, it's a bit restrictive for how many people actually access the hunting down there too.
And the hunting is such a big part of our economy during the colder months. And you've got your Mount Buller and your Falls Creek that draw people in. But the smaller country towns like Jameson and Lacola, they really thrive on the hunters coming through and buying fuel, staying there, having a shower after a couple of days in the bush, staying in that extra night or two. So it's just a big economy driver as well.
So I just want to go through the process because I love the fact that a lot of people talk about taking action and it's great to see people actually taking action. I call for it all the time saying, do what you can. So I love what you're doing there. So you got the change.org. It grew rapidly. Did you get in touch with the Shooters Union, SFFP there to say, hey, this has got some traction, or how did that come about? Because it's great that they're getting behind you and supporting you and helping guide you along the way to get to the next level. So how did that work?
So they got contacted by a friend of mine, which I'll give a bit of a shout out, Sean. Sean's an incredibly passionate hunter, and he sent them a message. So he sent Jeff Borman, which is a member of parliament, and a message. And Jeff responded from there and got on board.
Love it. Well done, Sean and Jeff, because it's great to do something, but then finding out that it's not going to really mean anything in the parliament side of things. So being able to adapt and change that. So now it does. Absolutely love it. So the petition is focused on stopping aerial culling of areas that hunters hunt. Why is that a benefit?
Well, the Game Management Authority have put out a thing saying that the deer license is going to go up in the new year. So with the license fees increasing, it shouldn't equal less opportunities. You know, money's tight for everyone at the moment. We've got the cost of living crisis that we're going through, and people just can't spend that. So for a lot of guys, they're going out, they're trying to get a feed, fill the freezer. They might strike lucky, and that's the meat sorted for a month or two. But making it harder and harder and more expensive, people are feeling the burn.
Oh, could not agree more there. Inflation is just ridiculous. The government really needs to get it under control. And I talk about it all the time. Cost of living it keeps getting harder and harder for a lot of people. To have a free-range, organic, fantastic meat source makes so much sense. And then without going through conservation, all the other things that are part of what we do, it's always frustrated me a lot, the aerial culling side on public land that taxpayers pay for, because A, it's costly. B, I feel hunters can really get out there and do that themselves and utilize the meat. That's got to be a win-win all the time. So I don't know a great deal about the aerial culling programs down there. Do you have a bit of information about those and costs and things like that?
So there's some data that was put out recently from the Australian Deer Association on the last culling operation that was held in the Victorian High Country. It found that they shot just over 2,000 deer. The helicopter fees alone was just under $400,000. So that roughly comes to about $270 per deer. If you put what licensed hunters are shooting according to the GMA, we're roughly saving them $37 million in the deer that we shoot anyway, plus the asset of us paying more than $5 million worth of license fees.
I love getting into data, and I love looking at that economic contribution, because if you're just talking about licensing fees, I love that side of it. And then the cost savings. And then you touched on a little bit before what people are spending when they're going to these areas to support local economies. There's just this flow-on effect that is never accurately portrayed, in my opinion. So, mate, that's fantastic to hear that sort of thing. But $270 to put down a deer that could provide a lot of meat and a lot of meals to a hunter and their family, loved ones. And I know you can't really share it down there, but I mean, hey, like, it's another crazy thing that we won't get into. But yeah, man, wow, just that's crazy. I don't understand, and I'll never probably will understand why we need to spend taxpayer dollars to aerial cull deer. Provide more opportunities. Don't take it away from us, because that's what it sounds like they're trying to do.
I think it's one of the things that drives me, or really frustrates me, is I grew up in South Africa and always been around animals, grew up hunting. With the world expanding and expanding, natural and wild places are getting less and less. To have an animal that is 100% an asset, if managed correct, you know, it gives diversity. They're eating the ground cover, so we have less severe fires as well. It's just not managed properly. And some of the species, like if you look at hog deer, you know, they're protected species in other places in the world. I don't understand why we don't see it as an asset. Yes, they're technically not supposed to be here, but neither are we, the cattle, the sheep, the cats, the dogs. When do you say something's been here long enough to be part of the landscape? So it's absolutely a gift horse that we're just looking in the mouth.
I've said that many times before, is where's that line? Why is it unacceptable for the deer to be on the landscape, but we can clear and raise livestock who aren't meant to be here, but that's okay because it promotes jobs and things like that? Well, okay, this is a resource that also can contribute and does contribute. Let's also make that clear, whether it be license fees, whether it be people spending money when they go away, purchasing firearms, ammunition. There's so many elements, camping gear, four-wheel drives, like the list goes on and on and on. So completely agree with everything you just said there in regards to that. And it's crazy to think we've got this great resource that I don't know if there's enough evidence and data out there as to how much damage they actually do to the landscape compared to others. And even if they compete with our native animals, I don't think the data research is there, or enough of it anyway, to really dig your heels in here and say these things are causing way too much issue.
Like, how many times have you seen fallow deer and kangaroos grazing next to each other in the paddocks? They act like they completely push them out of the area, but I see them together all the time.
Yeah, cannot say that's something that raises an issue for me. Again, I don't think we've got the information or the research done in regards to that. I think it's really easy to demonize deer and demonize what they do without the facts to back it up, because the catch cry is that they're feral. They're an introduced species. Yeah, okay, they are, but that doesn't mean that, hey, they've been here long enough that when do you stop calling them introduced? The word feral, I would sort of argue a little bit, because they weren't domestic animals that escaped. They were brought here as game. So, I mean, the argument of them being called feral is intricate as well. There's plenty of different elements to this thought process of where you should stand, sit, allow. It's a tricky one for people to understand and talk about. But I don't think it helps that we don't have as much information as we should have before we start making these allegations and, proclaim that these are a massive problem to our environment.
Anything left unmanaged can become a big problem. You see it with the kangaroo populations. They'll grow massively in an area to a point where they're in plague proportions and they cause issues. You saw it in South Africa as well. Drought season came. There's a ton of zebras. That's one of the first animals they culled, so it's easier for the other animals to survive. Everything within management there's the sweet spot where you can have both. You can have the deer on the landscape and you can have a low impact because you kept it under control.
Agreed. Everything, whether it be native, whether it be introduced, it does not matter. If you control numbers through good management practices, then you're not going to have an issue. Problem is, I think we let things get out of control and then we go crazy trying to rectify or right the ship, rather than being proactive and manage properly in the first place. So I completely agree with everything you've said. Mate, tell people where they can find the petition. So if you are from Victoria, please get over and sign it. If you're not from Victoria and you know someone in Victoria, please give them a call, send them a text message, email, I don't care, Snapchat them, do whatever you got to do. Tell them that they need to get behind this because it is a good cause that's going to help promote hunting. Let's get some of these things talked about in Parliament. Let's have them debated. Let's raise the profile of what we're doing out there. So, Marcel, give us the information, mate.
All right, so you can find it on the Victorian Parliament website, which is www.parliament.vic.gov.au. Or just Google Vic Parliament, it'll pop up. Scroll down to the bottom, there's a part that says Get Involved, Petitions. Go to Sign Petition and find e-petition on page 6. We've been pushed back a little bit. You can find it there. The petition shuts on the 17th of November because the last Parliament sitting for the year is the 23rd of November. We've just scraped by with a milestone. We've got 2,450 signatures. So that brings us up to the bare minimum to get spoken about. But the more we get, the longer the conversation's going to be.
All right, so a lot there. I will put a link in the show notes. I'll put it up on the podcast socials as well. So if you want to access whichever that is, go for it. So you go straight to the page to sign. Once again, if you're not in Vic, let someone know that is so they can get involved for you. Great cause. Love it. Hopefully, the more signatures we get, this will be coming out on September 23rd. So plenty of time still for a lot of people to get behind this. If you just share it with one or two people, those numbers are going to exponentially improve. So get behind it. I love it. Marcel, appreciate you getting involved and just taking that step to promote what we do and advocate. I love it. It's great to see someone with a passion for it. It's fantastic. So well done, mate, to you and your mate Sean as well. Let's get as much traction as we can here to make sure we get this debated in Parliament. So, mate, appreciate you coming on. Thank you for that. And I can't wait to see what happens.
Thanks, Matt.
I've finally got my hands on a product that I absolutely love, and it is super simple, but also so versatile to use. This means that you can tailor how you want to have your coffee when out in the bush. If you want to support the podcast and get an awesome bit of gear that I know you will love, and how you can use the code AHBpodcast to get 10% off. The link can be found in the show notes, socials, and on the website. Final press, you'll love it.
All right, g'day guys. Thanks for having me. I've just joined up, so definitely thankful for the opportunity to come and meet everybody and say g'day. You will see a lot more of me here now that I've joined up. So tonight, just going to go through and have a bit of a chat about me as a person and the podcast, if you've heard it. If you haven't, that's cool. And just the sort of journey behind it and what goes into it as we go across. So it is the Australian Hunting and Beyond podcast. I'm a glutton for punishment, so I've done a couple of different podcasts now, and I'll talk about that as we go. But I only recently joined the ADA. Been following the ADA for a long time, and I've been lucky enough, as Rick said, to have him on the podcast, Naomi as well, and the president of the Snowies ACT branch, Phoebe, as well. So really liking the advocacy and everything going on from the ADA, and that's why I sort of wanted to jump in and get involved. More impressive than that is that before signing up, they knew exactly the type of hunter that I was. So pretty impressed with that. Well done, ADA. So I always like to embarrass myself. I'm a PE teacher and just comes with the gig, doesn't bother me. So I just want to give you a bit of a background about me. I've always been an animal lover, and that has not changed. I've always loved the outdoors, and I really had three major loves throughout my life. The first one is the outdoors. So ever since I was little, and I can remember growing up here in Sydney, out at Liverpool, Mum and Dad had a caravan down the south coast, which is not very dear to my heart. Ulladulla area, just growing up, exploring down there, bike riding, fishing, prawning, you name it. So that was a really cool thing for that. So Mum and Dad moved and they went up to Queensland, which has been a really good change of scene, and especially being able to get out and smash those mud crabs. So that's been really cool. Again, the outdoors has been just an absolute passion of mine. I've been just through a range of things. So I love the snow, and we'll talk about the snow in a bit because I had a nice experience with that this year. And then in this one here, that's me out on the end there, diving up in Hervey Bay for a whale watching research thing. So any opportunity I can get to further sort of my knowledge or the outdoors or anything like that, I'm all about. The next one about me is sport. I'm a very passionate sports person, whether it be follow, whether it be playing, and hence I've been lucky enough to play in multiple World Cups, and growing up I've been a very competitive sports person, whether it be at one stage I was in the top 8 for New South Wales for tennis and played representative soccer. My father instilled that in me. He actually played soccer for Australia and was in the reserve side for the 74 World Cup team. So sport and that competitive nature has always been a really big passion for my life. And I think that's where hunting really started to step in and play a part. As I'm getting older, I'm 40 now, I really started to think about not being able to do as much as I possibly can on the sporting field. And I wanted a hobby, an activity, something to keep me healthy and that I can do for the rest of my days. And the last one is teaching and learning. As I said, I'm a PE teacher. It is something that I love. The other thing is that I have what is known as a bit of a growth mindset, and I'm always trying to better myself and learn more. And that's really where I think the podcast stemmed from and has grown to where it is today. I think that the day you stop learning is a very, very sad day, and It's what I get out of bed for, whether it be learning myself or obviously educating students at my school. So I started when I was 18. Mum and Dad never been into firearms, never been into hunting, but very big on the outdoors. They are keen fishers, and I really had an interest in the hunting side. So at age roughly about 20, I got out there and I got my firearms license. A couple of mates got new into it, got into a hunting club. Then life got in the way. I left, I joined the army, moved away, and then a range of different jobs, and it just sort of fell apart. I didn't get out as much as I wanted due to demands of life, whether it be my jobs and things like that, and then got into teaching. So I went back to university. If you go into university, you probably know you're a very poor person during those times. So I got rid of everything. I didn't have anything and got out of hunting and the outdoors. But then I always had that interest, and I was, always following along in the background, whether it be watching hunting shows, Meat Eater, Jim Shockey, that sort of stuff. But it wasn't until I got back over to the States, and there I rekindled that passion to get out and about and start hunting again. So after getting back from the US, my wife was seconded there for 3 months. So she was there for a long time, and I went over for quite a bit of time. Came back 2 months later, and to the probably disappointment of my wife, I will say, got many firearms in that very quick period. Thank God we weren't married then, so I'm not sure why she stuck around. But anyway, I'm very glad she has. So then just got straight back into it, whether it was hunting, whether it was clay shooting, whether it was just going down the range, the whole lot. And that picture was actually my very first state forest hunt. Now, I always look back and I talk about learning and growing as a person. I did not know there were deer here in Australia. So this is 2018, had absolutely no knowledge of deer being here in Australia. That was the research part of it. Found out and went, oh my God, what the hell? Because I was looking at going back to the States to be chasing them around. So yes, a bit naive, a bit daft there, but hey, that's exactly what happened. So like all of us, if you've been into the state forests, the first few trips, I did my absolute best to learn as much as I can through the available avenues, YouTube, Google, TV shows, all that sort of rigmarole. And the first few trips were really, really good. I didn't get a deer, and that's fine because it took me a damn long time to get a deer, but I think it was the second trip or the first trip I saw 3 red deer. And straight away, that was in Green Hills State Forest. Thought, hell, this is great. I'd found sign, I'd found trails. They were where I thought they were going to be. So I felt really, really good about myself there. I felt I was on to a winner, and I felt, hey, this is going to be fantastic. This is going to be a really great start to my career. It's going to be super successful. Well, on top of that, I got a ballot spot at Manus. First year applying, and I went, this is it. I can feel it. Well, I was wrong. I was very wrong, because that year we got hit with the fires down there, and that hunt actually got postponed. So the bushfires hit, and then COVID hit as well. So there was this flow-on effect, and that was multiple years that sort of I was sat on the sideline after really being pumped, being sort of sitting up there going, I'm really onto something here. I'm really excited getting out there. I found deer. I'm very, very close. And just going back to those 3 red deer is I've always preached about being ethical and legal and responsible. And I think it's very important that we do that. And those deer were standing there probably 50 metres away, comfortable shot. I'd sat down. They had no idea I was there. But behind them was a road, and it was not a safe backdrop. And even though I was super excited to see deer, I didn't even raise the rifle because it wasn't that safe backdrop. The wind swirled, they got me, and they took off. But, that's part of who I am and something I preach a lot if you've heard the podcast as well. So things got put on hold. We hit the bushfires, we hit COVID, and I'm sitting there just chomping at the bit about hunting. Well, then on top of that, during COVID, I then had a child. So that added to the element of not being able to get away as much because it was our first child. And I talk about the growth mindset and I talk about wanting to be forever learning. So during that period, I don't know if you remember, but they did all these things like offer free courses at TAFE to learn more. So I thought I'd take full advantage of that, and I actually jumped in and did my statement of attainment to harvest wild game animals, which is the Kangaroo Harvesters course. So I was lucky enough to do that. And throughout that was fantastic. Got to go out and on the practical elements, go and learn how to do everything firsthand and be taught by a professional harvester, which was really, really good for me because that was a different side of it. Up until that point, I'd shot some foxes and rabbits and things like that, but I hadn't really gone down the path of meat harvesting. So COVID was a blessing and a curse, obviously, but for me, it was actually more of a blessing because I got to spend time with my child. I wasn't going to get out as much, but I had the opportunity to further develop my knowledge and my skills. So that then took me to the point where I was like, well, I've got these. What do I do to continue my learning in a time where we're sort of locked down and shut down? And that's where the podcasting sort of started. And it started for my students. So I set up a podcast and it's really, really boring. I don't know how they listen to it. I'm not going to lie. It is literally me talking about HSC, PDHPE for them to do better in their HSC and hopefully, meet their aspirations. I'm not going to lie, it was terrible. The audio was horrible. It sounded completely crap. And I remember listening to it going, well, hey, it's better than nothing. No one else does this for their students. That's a win for them. And a heap of the students really appreciated it, loved it, and they actually did well and attributed some of that to them because they could drive to school and they could study on the way to school. So I thought, well, here's an opportunity to, again, get better at something different, which is what I'm about. So I actually turned around and started to learn how to do podcasting. And then I had this idea. I hadn't really been into the hunting scene. I don't know anyone in the hunting scene at all. And I thought, well, I love listening to Joe Rogan. I just love those conversations. And I also love listening to Meat Eater. And I didn't know if there was an Australian version until I sort of researched and found AHP. And I think by this stage he'd stopped. And I went, well, what an opportunity for me to jump in and just be able to talk to people. A few issues. I don't know anyone, but it was always just in there wanting to tick away at me because I like talking, I like to meet new people, and I like to have conversations. So I came up with a plan. Well, all right, I've got to upskill myself on actually how to do a podcast, how to do audio, because one thing I'm very pedantic on is the fact that even if you have the best content in the world, if it's hard to hear, you're probably not going to listen to it. So I wanted to be able to create as best audio as possible so it sounds like I have this professional setup and studio at home, which is definitely not the case. So I created a little thing called the Australian Hunting Stories. And it was one where I thought, hey, I'll be able to get onto people, just chat to them about hunting stories and cool things that happen, successes, failures, learning. And for that, I'll be able to learn along the way as I go. Well, that never took off. It was in my mind, it was there, but it never actually eventuated. What did eventuate was I joined another hunting club because I'd moved out to Camden and went on. I really need to meet people in regards to hunting. The wife had sort of put a bit of pressure on me and said, I don't like you going away on your own. You're a father now. You've really got to change or think about from a safety perspective, etc. And I agreed. So I said, okay, well, I joined a club. It was there I met a couple of people and started a podcast. And it was really good because they knew contacts and they knew people. And that's where the Endless Pursuit started. Up and down. It was fantastic to start with. We started with 3 and then we went down to 2. And probably the best experience out of all of them is I got to talk to one of my idols. So I was lucky enough to get to speak with Jim Shockey. If you haven't seen his millions of episodes on TV about everything that he's hunted, that was a really fantastic experience. He's just such a nice bloke. I absolutely loved that. I cherished every moment of it. Then sort of, again, we talk about life getting in the way and time and At that stage, the podcast was taking almost one episode, which was anywhere between an hour and a half and 2.5 hours. It was taking me anywhere between 15 and 20 hours to edit. And that was way too much time in my life, because this is actually me sitting in the hospital while my wife is waiting to give birth to our twins. I have a very, very understanding and lovely wife, obviously, because I was paying her zero attention between her screaming and I was editing the podcast, because one thing that I've always said is if I start something, I'm going to see it through and do really well at it. So throughout that whole time and multiple times going into hospital due to all these complications with my twins, I was still churning out the podcast and never missed a Monday on that launch date. During that time, I did finally have my twins after a couple of false starts and them coming very early. And I was lucky enough that they came, and we're in newborn intensive care unit. So I was in there for 4 weeks. And at the same time, between going and visiting them and getting out, I still managed to get all those podcasts out, and they were while I was still looking after my little one at home as well. So that was a very challenging time, and I was extremely time poor. So things came up, questions came up, and I went, well, the most precious thing that we have with us is time. And it wasn't sustainable. I couldn't be doing 15 and 20 hours worth of editing. I had some conversations with my partner at the time, and it just wasn't going to play out or work out or get any better. So I decided it was time for me to move on. And so I created a new podcast. Now, I was already doing 95% of the podcast. The only thing I wasn't doing was just the social tile on Facebook. So it really wasn't going to be anything that I was unaware or didn't know how to do. So I literally, once it ended, the very next Monday, I had the new podcast out, which was Australian Hunting and Beyond. Now, what did I want to do with this podcast? Firstly, I didn't really know. All I knew is I wanted to be a positive advocate. And I do that in my day-to-day job. I try to be a good role model. And I wanted to do that for hunting, because I know you've probably seen it or felt it or heard it when talking to friends. I'm the only one in my friendship group that hunts. They're not understanding of hunting, but they don't have a valid reason why. When you ask them why aren't you accepting of hunting, they cannot give you an answer, and it's generally just rhetoric that doesn't make sense because they don't know. The other one was education, both for myself and for others. It's been a learning journey for me along the way, and I really wanted to take people on the journey with me. And if I could help anyone along the way while I'm learning, I think that's a really positive thing. It was awareness of what hunting actually is for a lot of people and what they do and why they do it. And realistically, I learn by talking. I love to bounce ideas off people, have those conversations, and that is exactly what it is. It's my opinion. I'm not an expert by any stretch of the imagination, but I learn that way, and I love to have those conversations with people that have far more expertise than I do, and that's how I develop and I grow, and I attribute a lot of that to my journey along the way. It's also for entertainment. I love it. I have fun with it. It's great. I get to meet some really good people that I never ever would have without doing the podcast. So that's been really great. And the promotion side of promoting hunting in a good light. And that is what I try to achieve. It's what I try to push every time we do it, so that people have an understanding, if they're not into hunting, that they might change their mind if I can do a good job, and if they listen to it. If they don't, they don't. That's part of life. So all those things sort of encapsulated what I wanted to do with the podcast, and I had some other ideas of how I was actually going to do it. So I created different segments for the podcast. One's called Overwatch, and that is literally where I either talk about something that's just popped up, whether it be aerial culling, whether it be new firearms laws in WA, and I try and grab on some experts to come on and have a conversation about those. Literally just did one with Shooters Union New South Wales in regards to the upcoming election, as you would all know that we've got this weekend, on who to vote for, because I've had a lot of people that do not know who are pro-firearms parties, and they might change their idea. So we did that as an informative one from someone who's a bit more experienced than I am. I want to do one about gear. I love technology and I love gear. I love finding new gear, and that's been really exciting because I've got to speak to people about some really cool gadgets and things like that. There's a new app that I don't think's been launched yet, but it's a contract app between property owners and hunters. Helped, I don't know if you've seen it, it's a wall mount, all right, from Aussie Skull Mounts and Designs. Had them on before they launched in regards to launching their product, which is a really cool one that you can hang your Euro mounts from. And then I wanted to, obviously the bread and butter of the podcast where I get people on and just a conversation and a chat. So obviously I thought I'd pick the pictures with Naomi and Rick because they have been on and they were thoroughly enjoyable. As Rick said, he's coming back on. I can't wait for that one. And that's where the podcast has really been, to cover a broad array of topics, hopefully do so in a manner that people enjoy it if they tune in. All right, so then there was the evolution of the podcast. I sort of did it and it was a bit fun. I went, you know what? I'm going to try and be better at what I'm doing. And I thought the logo looked pretty crappy. So I went and designed a new logo for it. I felt that was a bit better of a start and whatnot. Again, I talked about not having a podcast studio and I really don't. My setup is literally in a room. It's as best soundproofed as possible. But everything I do is online. I don't usually record in person, and I'll go through about what that looks like and how I change it to sound like it is. And I've had pretty good feedback from that. The OSA Australia, who was a sponsor of the last podcast, told us that her best friend's a professional podcast editor and mine sound exactly like her. So that sort of thing is what I'm striving for, to make it a good listen, good audio, and sound as professional as possible for what I'm putting out in the market. So when I record, I can get channels in of people. And you probably noticed I'm recording this one. I spoke to the committee and said, I've got this crazy idea to present to you guys, record it. And at the end, when we have some questions, I've got a microphone there if there's any. And I get back these different channels of audio. Now, a lot of work has to be done for this because they're not in a professional studio or anything like that. You have to change the audio. And if you've heard some podcasts out there that don't do this, you probably hear they're all different levels. You might not hear, you might have to turn up between one person speaking and turn down for the other. So that initial one is what they come through as when they're recorded. And after I work my magic with a few different things, the audio levels change, and that is the desired amount of volume to put it out and publish it. Some of them platforms are very pedantic on the actual audio quality and letting them go through. Now you probably notice with this one here is that's just one channel, and you can see the dark blue bits here. These are someone talking for the whole time. These parts here are background noise. And I don't know if you've ever heard any audio, but if there's been background noise, is you will hear that right throughout and makes it very, very difficult to hear or to engage in the conversation. So what I do is I grab that after I enhance all the audio. I'm then also able to play around with it, and I'll turn that into that. And what that means is there is no audio, there's no noise from that one, so that whoever is talking can be heard very clearly without any background. You might have heard it like crackling or sizzling or someone breathing heavy or moving things around. And that takes a lot of time to do that because that's got to be done for every single part. Now you can see here, this is the same audio, and you can see every little bit of here. This is obviously on the background, but now I've removed it all. That has to be done individually. AI is getting far better, but it's definitely nowhere near it needs to be. And that is a process. It takes me about 3 or 4 repetitions of every single one to get it to sound like that. Then I like to make things harder for myself because that's just who I am. So I record on a program called Riverside FM. It is like Zoom, but it is designed for podcasting. And what I mean by that is the audio that you hear from Zoom, if you've ever been on a Zoom call and you hear that sort of echoey or someone drops out and you can't hear it properly, I didn't want that for the podcast. So I pay a subscription to Riverside. And what they do is it's the same as Zoom, except the audio is recorded locally on the drive, which means there's no dropout, there's no interference, and then it uploads after the podcast, which then I can play around with the audio and make it sound as good as possible. I recently went on a trip down to Bago. I think it was June off the top of my head in that sort of period with the 5 boys that you can see on the screen. And it was a pretty crazy trip, which I'm going to tell you about in a moment. So to give you an understanding of that's what I've got to play with during that time, because that's 6 different audio channels, because there's 6 different people speaking. There are times when someone has really, really bad internet and they will drop out. On the previous podcast, I talked about how I would do 15 to 20 hours. That's because one of the co-hosts, their internet was that bad, they would drop out maybe 10, 15, 20 times a session. And what that would mean is I'd have to line individually up those segments of audio so that no one heard and it just was a nice, smooth conversation, which most people didn't. So 6 different audio channels there, again, going through that amplification, silencing, all the different things that I play around to give us the end product at that. So you can see that's just one different one. And as we said, that one there, it was a dropout. So that's me actually sitting there and having to listen. That's a 2.5 hour podcast, listening to when I have to implement it and align all those channels so that people think we're having a conversation and no one's stepping over the top of each other so people can't hear and make sure they're identical. That episode took me probably about 20 hours. It was a one-off one, but it was a really, really cool story. And this is why. So I know you guys just went to Bago. That's where it happened. Down at Bago, I arrived in the afternoon about 4 o'clock, I think this was. It was just starting to drizzle a little bit of snow. By I think it was 2 a.m., 3 a.m. that morning, we had 30 centimetres dump on us, which had destroyed camp. 2 people's camps had been totally destroyed, trashed, awnings collapsed, absolutely. It was carnage. We decided at 3:30 a.m. that we were going to evacuate the mountain because it was still going. We had a Zoleo there. We checked the weather forecast and they were saying snow for the next 24 hours. One of the boys was from Queensland, so he was hating life. Definitely being down there, he'd come down from about 32 degrees, I think, into minus. So on the way back down, which is a pretty cool one. So that's where we ended up staying in a cabin. It was much better than up on the thing. But on the way down, we were I think we're lucky. What happened, and there's a whole episode, that's that 6-part one, is we actually saved a couple of backpackers. So a couple of backpackers in this really tired, beaten up old van had decided they were going to go up the mountain because they were going to try and get over and across the Kosciuszko. Had no snow chains. It was a 2-wheel drive. The tyres were bald and they had got stuck there from about 11 p.m. Their hazards had drained the battery and killed the battery, so they were completely stuck. When we arrived, a couple of people had driven around them. They had no warm provisions. They had no blankets. They literally were sitting there freezing. So we did our good deed and got them out of there on the way back down. So I always say things happen for reasons. I'm a very big believer in that. And our decision to go back was probably a really, really good one to help them out. It was a really great trip. It stuffed us unbelievably. We've done all this scouting. The Queenslander that I spoke about coming down was Rob from Athena Spatial. I'm not sure if you're aware of his gear, but he does basically like a Google Maps on Avenza. So if you're hunting in the state forest, and he's done them for a few state forests, he is really, really good at what he does. And we basically, thank God for that, because we had spent all our time looking at Bago and now that was out. We weren't going back up the mountain because it was under 30 centimetres of snow. Walking along was as crunchy as hell, so it was a big issue. So we found some new spots. I also found where probably the deepest bog hole was, but that's a different story. But hey, look, nothing frightens a trident, all right? That's all I'll say about that one. And we end up getting out there. I couldn't agree more. I don't know which gentleman said it before, but having 2 cars, because if I didn't have that second car there, I have no idea how I would have got out. And that was actually on the way back. We'd already driven through this, so I didn't even know it was there, and even my friend's car behind us. So all these things that sort of learning, the podcast has been an immense help for me. And I was super lucky that I got my first state forest deer down in Mooragle North. It was a great experience. It wasn't my first deer. I had got a rooster prior to that, but this was earlier this year that in scouting, trying to get ready for the rut, I was able to take a nice fallow. Now, I went home and I was absolutely beaming My wife did not care. Again, she just kept reminding me of the fact that I spent a lot of time away chasing these animals unsuccessfully, and that, I need to be, I need to really have a good hard look at myself. So me being me, went, I'm going to prove her wrong. And on the second state forest hunt that year, I got a second deer. Now, my wife has an issue with this. She thinks it's the most expensive venison that she will ever buy. And I have really tried to change her mind on that, but it is pretty expensive. So why do I do it? A lot of people ask me, why do you do it? It is a significant investment in time. I have a 4-year-old. I have two 2-year-olds, obviously twins. I'm a very busy person in my work life. And I guess it's started out as a learning journey for me, which has really changed and grown. So this one here, I went to the Hunters Campfire Hunt Camp up at Nundle State Forest this year for the rut. That was a really good experience to meet the boys because we'd spoken a lot. I've just been on their episode 100, which I was very thankful for them to invite me back for. If you have been to Nundle or you haven't been to Nundle, please be aware of the leeches. They are absolutely terrible in that joint. I remember being in there with the boys, and they had a communal sort of 2 caravans and an awning, and the leeches there were just unreal. Like, it was moving underneath the, like you're literally looking at the floor and it is moving. So, but meeting people, just some great, fantastic mates that I've now think. And then it's sort of amplified. The podcast has gone well above my expectations. I didn't think it would. I'm a nobody. I don't know people in hunting, and it's always been like that. And I'm really happy to say is that I've achieved a couple of things with the podcast. I've been first on Apple Podcasts in the podcast charts. I've been in the top 10. Now, this one was a real big one for me personally because that's for all sports in Australia. That was at the same time the Football World Cup was on, and the Socceroos had their own podcast, and I was in front of them. So things like that were really big. And then being 116th, that's all podcasts in Australia on the charts. So that's been a really cool experience. I never thought that would have happened. I never thought people would want to listen to me talk rubbish about something that I'm learning. As I said, I'm no expert, far from, but having that opportunity. And then it's continued to grow, which is just, it's been outstanding. And I've really just, I don't even know how to describe it, but to the point where we're now in the top 5% globally ranked as a podcast, which is just, I sort of have to pinch myself sometimes because I still don't understand why people tune in and listen for that. Got no idea. Now, it's not massive numbers. I'm always pretty transparent in everything I say. So this tells you in the first week of where those podcasts sit. So, to be in the top 5%, you have to have 938 listens. We generally get about 2,500, 3,000 in that vicinity. So it is something I'd love to one day get into that top 1%, but that's just part of it. That has been a driving force for me now, being competitive and being in sport. That is something that I really enjoy, which wasn't something that stuck out for me. But I think the biggest reason is I want to try and be the best advocate for hunting that I possibly can, because I want my kid, that's not a real gun, by the way, it's a fake firearm just to get him used to the bolt, all right? So it's really, for me, I want my kids to be able to hunt if they choose to. Because I honestly feel we see all these things happening with WA, what's going down in South Australia with bow hunting, Victoria is now on the list. There's so much that we are up against, and I don't get it and I don't understand it, and I really want to be, now that there is a bit of a platform for it, I really want to be out there advocating as best I can in a positive light, because I've always loved the outdoors. I've been really getting my kids out into the outdoors as best possible. And I just think without us coming together, without the great work the ADA is doing, without hunters standing up for each other, I really feel that we're just going to lose something that is so important to all of us. There are other elements of what I try and do. I'm not sure if you know about my Facebook group. I admin Fellow Deer Hunters of Australia. It's one for people to have a safe space to post. I try and do my best there. Unfortunately, sometimes we can be our own worst enemies and people putting each other down. And that also has a really big impact on me. I did a podcast last week with Luke from the Hunting Republic and Brackenware, and we talked about all these different things. We talked about how we get better as a group, why do the activists, why do they come together far better than we seem to be able to? And one of those things that came out of that was a listener reached out and he started a Facebook group called Supportive Hunters Australia, I think it is. Just a space for people to be able to post and not have the judgment, not have someone say, oh, you should have done it this way or you should have done it that way, because that puts a lot of people off. So that's been one of it. I want to open up for anyone that has any questions about the podcast or whatever. I'm very open. I might get, if anyone does, Rick to come and grab the microphone to pass around. If you would like to be on it, there is a good chance this is probably going to be on an episode. So open to the floor. Has anyone got any questions for me?
Okay, so your podcast, does it cost money for people to listen to it, or is it for free?
It is absolutely free. I have zero plans on making it cost anything. It is, if anything, it costs me quite a bit of money for me to do that. So
yes, I know the burden on your life, for running things. As I was president here for many years, it really takes a toll on your life. So I thank you for what you're doing, and it's great.
No, I appreciate that. Look, it's costly. It's a costly startup. My gear cost me about $3,000, just the podcasting gear. It's not including all the laptop and things like that. I've had to upgrade a lot of that. I am planning one day to do video podcasts. It's just, I've got to upgrade some gear and just waiting for some money to come for that. And I don't have any sponsors. I don't do it for that. I like talking to people. I hope that I put things out that people can relate to, that come on the journey with me and that portray hunters in a really good light. John?
Yeah, look, as most people in this room can probably tell you, I've been involved in advocacy for us for about 30 odd years, give or take. Just interested in your opinion. I rail against a lot of people on a lot of those Facebook groups because they post pictures of there was someone posted a video I seen this morning about a flying pig. So they've hit a pig with an arrow and it's run around jumping up and down in the air. That is absolutely gold for people trying to ban bow hunting. People post pictures of them taking their kids hunting. 100% favour that, took my kids hunting. But they say, I took my son out for his 10th birthday and he shot this deer, right? At Goulburn, New South Wales, you can't handle a gun till you're 12, right? So as someone who is in the podcast business, it is a serious concern to me that all we're doing is manufacturing evidence for our enemies to use against us because people can't help themselves. They've just got to post every single thing they do. So I'm just curious on your take on that.
I couldn't agree more. And I guess one of the latest episodes I haven't made too many friends is because that's what I honestly feel, that we can be better as hunters. And I say it on the podcast all the time, is that if you have to sit there and think, is that the way to go about it? Or am I giving ammunition to the antis, or the vegans, or whatever it might be? Just don't post it. And one of the latest episodes with Shooters Union New South Wales, we spoke about, there's a really passionate young bloke who I love his content, and he got on social media and he sprayed Georgie Purcell, calling her every effing name under the sun. And that's a really bad look for us. I get that that's his feelings and I appreciate that, but there is a time and a place. Having a beer with mates, talking about it, by all means. But I think when you put yourself in the public, when you put yourself out into the public arena, you've got to be mindful that people are going to scrutinise and pick at you, and to try and do your best that you can make sure you don't give anybody ammunition, especially the people that want to see what we do and what we love, not here anymore. So I'm all for exactly what you're saying, and my podcast is very much about that, talking about those things and promoting those things, because it's the future. And whether you agree with it or not, and that's cool, everyone's entitled to an opinion, and I'm not saying I'm right, but the better we do not showcasing that sort of stuff, the better it's going to be for all of us, because we don't need, I think we need more hunters personally. People might disagree, but we need the people that are not anti-hunting and not pro-hunting to be on our side. And I think if you're posting things that are distasteful for us as hunters, then that's an issue, in my opinion. I hope that covered everything.
Couldn't agree more with Matt on that one. And I'll just reiterate on what we sort of went through on the Deer Education Weekend. us as ADA members, the Sydney branch especially, you got to make sure we're putting forward a good image. That includes just take a little bit extra time before you put your pictures up on Facebook. And sometimes it might be your first year and you just want to get that picture up on there because you're proud about it. Just take that little bit extra time, clear away the blood, make it a really good presentable shot because as they said, they're just giving ammo to our enemies. So take that little bit extra time and present the animal. Another question?
With how successful the podcast has been, where are you planning on taking it?
I think the Hunters Campfire asked us that, but that episode got scrapped, so the 100's a do-over. I don't know. I honestly don't know. I sort of said I'm going to keep going with it. I love chatting to people. I love going down different topics and exploring different things, and I'll keep going while the passion is there, and I can't see it diminishing, to be honest. Like, I've already got the next 8 weeks of guests lined up. So I'm always just thinking about or seeing something on social media. And one of the things I really wanted to do is not just go for big names. Is everyone's got a story. People can learn from everybody. And this week's episode was a bloke who was lucky enough. He went out on his first actual trip hunting with the bow in Victorian high country, and he nailed a fallow buck. It's a really cool story. He isn't someone well known, but I loved hearing about it, and I want everyone to have a voice that deserves one. As John said, that do things ethically right, portray hunting in a good light. And I'm very big on that. If I record with someone that I feel it's not, I just won't push it out there because at the end of the day, that's what I'm trying to do with it. Where it goes, I don't know. It's not going to be a business. It's not going to be anything like that. But it's just, I guess it's a passion project that I'm learning along the way as I go, and it's really helping me and it's helping others out there because I get the emails or the thank yous, and I love that too. That probably makes the most for it. And also that legacy that my kids are going to hear this, that my students potentially are going to hear this. So I want to be setting that example and hopefully being a positive advocate.
If there was one person, whether it be Australian or from overseas, who would you like to have on the podcast and why?
Oh, look, I'd love Steve Ranella. I mean, that's the big one for me. I've been pretty lucky. I had Profty on the last one. That was really, really good. He's a great guy. Had some really good people. But I think Steve Ranella, his advocacy over in the States has been just absolutely outstanding. It would be a toss-up between him and Rogan, because I think Rogan has grown hunting over there especially and worldwide just because he is who he is. But I feel Ranella, just with what he has done and what he's been able to achieve, is just absolutely outstanding for everyone across multiple countries. So that would be the one I'd pick, or one of them.
He's a world of knowledge. Like, I love listening to Steve
100%.
and Joe.
100%. I listen religiously to both. So.
More questions? Surely. Kim.
If you could only give one piece of advice to promote hunting, what would that be to people starting out?
Do it for the right reason. Do it because you are doing it to learn, be better in yourself, and have that genuine passion about hunting or wanting to pursue it, and that respect for the animal. You know, we get bombarded with information. Listening to the current ADA episode with Sean, it just rings home so much. There's so much misinformation about our quarry and that they're feral and all these things. And just telling people to be respectful and do the right thing out there. And everything you do, whether someone's watching or whether someone's not watching, do the right thing that's not going to come back on you. And I've said it, I've had deer in the sites. I'm lucky enough, one of the listeners has taken me to one of his properties where, we went for the rooster, chasing rooster stags that were croaking, if that's what you call it. And they were 5 metres over the other side of the fence. No one watching. The property owner's saying, take the shot. I would not pull that trigger. And that would be the message for me. Just be true to yourself. Doesn't matter conduct yourself in a way that you'd be proud of. Doesn't matter who's there watching or not.
And I think the essence of that is how you do anything is how you do everything. And that's what we have to be careful of as a hunter community.
Yep, no, I'd agree.
When you got your first state forest deer, what was the first meal you cooked?
It was Probably the most disappointing state forest deer I've ever got, to be honest, because if I get that photo back up, where is it? Don't know if you can tell. We found her literally 2 minutes after the shot. She was bloated to all hell. On cutting her open, her organs had white spots and crap right through it. So we didn't chance it. Like, one of the things I learned on the kangaroo harvesting course was, when in doubt, throw it out. And if there's anything there, you can't take it to the chiller. Like, literally. So unfortunately, it was a very happy, sad progress. I think we walked back to camp after taking her, and I don't think I spoke to my mate for probably 35 minutes. I didn't know how to feel. I was elated, but so angry in the same breath. So, and touching on what John said, that was the photo. I try and do things to portray it. So if anyone gets it, hopefully they can see the respect in that. But unfortunately, didn't get to. The second one was a different story. I definitely took that out, and I think the first one I did was, my wife just does this nice stuffed roll. So just bat it down and then filled it and then smoked it, and it was absolutely delicious. So I'm a big fan of smoking any sort of meat, but venison, if you look after it right, it is really, really good. So that was mine.
So what kind of smoker do you have?
I am a real tight ass, and I've got the Pit Boss because it's cheap and it does the job. So it's just, I'm always in that conundrum of, do I spend more money on guns and scopes than something else? So I tend to try and look for that.
As all of us are here very into hunting in bits and pieces, and, you know, we're outdoorsy sort of people, where do you think, or how do you want to see, as Australians, to encourage hunting and the outdoor life? Because as far as I'm concerned, we're losing that. Like, everyone can turn and say, oh yeah, my grandfather used to hunt and shoot rabbits, but yeah, I don't do that anymore. I think as a nation, we're losing that sort of thought and mindset where you just go to Woolies and get your packet of steak and away you go. How do you see us trying to promote hunting and getting back to our roots, our grandfathers and our, you know, grandmothers' ways? Like, what do you see the evolution of that coming around?
I think that's a really multifaceted question, because I don't think it's just hunting. As a teacher, I see it every day with young people, their inability to do physical activity. Everyone always tells me, you're a PE teacher, you must love it. No. PE is not the sport, or not the lesson that we probably all grew up with, looking forward to get out and run around. Kids don't want to do it anymore. The statistics show that literally, I reckon 90% of my school do not play sport. They do not go outside at all. They literally go home and they grab their phones. And that's it. That's all they're getting. So I think it's I don't think it's just a hunting thing. I think it's a overarching thing that we need to address in society. The problem is how do we change that culture with mobile phones and social media being such a big part of our children's lives? The other issue to that is the censorship that occurs for hunting. That and the algorithms, that is a big problem too. So the way I feel that we need to do it is by portraying it in a positive light and trying to get as many people on board as possible. Now, I'd be a hypocrite if I spoke to you and said, hey, I talk about advocacy and growing our numbers and I'm not doing anything about it. So I currently went out and I've got my firearms instructor license. So that's another way for me to try and get more people engaged in our lifestyle, hobby, whatever passion, whatever you want to call it. I think if we can all get 1, 2, 3 people, and that flow-on effect and those numbers, that snowball effect, is what we need to start thinking about. And we have the argument, Monday's episodes with Athena Spatial, who has now got some data that tells us essentially the top state forest to hunt with what species and things like that. Now, he's in two minds about dumping it and getting it out there because he's already had a lot of flack. Now, I know the people I've got into hunting have also now got out of hunting because they're not as... I'm a pig-headed bloke and very stubborn. Me not getting a deer just makes me want one more. Whereas my mates are the opposite. They went out, this is too hard, I'm out. There's a lot of time, a lot of effort, a lot of money, and I haven't been successful, I'm out. So I think we need to be better, as everybody, is growing our own numbers. And I don't know it, but I'd love to know the retention rate of hunters. I'd love to know how many people get into hunting but stay in hunting for the long haul. And there's opposing views on it. I know people say, but if they're not truly passionate, we don't want them in the sport. Okay, but then think about the flow-on effect for those. If you get someone in and they love it, they're probably then going to try and get their kids more outdoors, that their kids will get that passion. So I think we need to all do our little bit as best we can and hope for the best, because you don't know what curveballs are going to come from any side. We're seeing that right around the country at the moment. But that disconnection from where food comes from, that's a big one. People not knowing, and I tell a story that being a PE teacher, I was going through anatomy and I was talking about the ribs and the different ribs. And she had the light bulb moment that the ribs she eats from Woolworths came from an animal. That concerns me, is that simple disconnection there puts us further and further away. So I think cooking is a really good way to do it, and engaging people that way as well. So whether it be sharing food, I can't remember the gentleman who said before, gave it to the neighbours, love it. Things like that, any little bit helps in my opinion, as long as it's done in a positive manner. In Victoria? Victoria, you're not, yeah. Victoria, there's been a lot of debate, and I heard I was on the Hunters Campfire, they said you can with someone else, and I actually sent them the link that it was debated in their parliament that says you can't. They just don't pursue it. Now that concerns me, because when do they want to pursue it? Because it's legally written in legislation that you're not allowed to share game meat. That's a big problem. I agree. And again, I think I had Field and Game president on at the time. He's no longer in that position, Danny Ryan, and he made a very good point which really resonated with me. They're not trying to go an all-out assault on hunting. It's death by 1,000 cuts. And those little ones like that, not being able to share game meat, is, I feel, a really very strategic, smart play by our opposition, because that's who they are. They're opposing what we love to do.
Just further to that, over the last couple of years, I've noticed a bit of a shift before COVID, and now with the cost of living getting a little bit tighter, there's been a shift, especially at our last education weekend, my Sambo Hunters education weekend, where people want to know the whole process. It's not about, I want to get a gun and I just want to go shoot stuff, which was before COVID. A lot of people that approached me, I'm in the construction industry, get a lot of males that are in my business, and once they find out you're a hunter, whether or not they got guns or they don't, they just want to go hunting, they just want to go shoot stuff. They don't care about the whole process. Lately, over the last couple of years, since the cost of living has been going through the roof, I've noticed a big change in people's attitude towards hunting, and it's up to us as ADA members to keep pushing those good values. So I feel it, and I'm always pushing the food agenda. If you see me on social media, I love posting up my food. I love prepping it, and I love sharing it as well. So do yourself a favour and make sure that we're able to keep on hunting, and our kids are able to keep hunting, and keep pushing that good sort of reply that you need to do for us as ADA members.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with that, and that's why I joined. I've only been a member for a month and a half or something like that. I really did try to get to the last meeting. I didn't want this to be my first, but so be it. I've sat on the sideline watching what the ADA do for a while, because I didn't want to invest in a club and it go the wrong way. And unfortunately, in my opinion, sometimes that happens. So it's been a big step, but I love what's going on. That podcast today, The Raw, man, that's just music to my ears. From 2 podcasts ago, as I mentioned with Luke before, they were stuff we were calling for. We were calling for actually getting data and evidence to back up what we're saying, because that's limited in Australia anyway. So yeah, food's a big one. If we can get out and do those things, that's just the way to go, in my opinion.
Information is really limited in Australia on hunting. A couple of years ago when I was studying, I tried to do an essay on poaching in Australia, being similar, close to what I was wanting to do. And there was very, very little literature. There's literature from the US, of course, and Italy, but from an information point of view on hunters, retention, membership activities, there's virtually nothing. So you will struggle to find information is the short of what I'm getting to.
Oh, I couldn't agree more. That episode, it ruffled a lot of feathers, but the essence was to say, what are we doing well and what are we doing sort of poorly? And one of the ones I said there was not knowing or not doing it in a good manner. I love what the ADA does with the hog ballot, but we talk about the DPI come out and say we're third off the top of my head combined with fishing in primary production value to the economy. But where's that money going? Because people care about what they care about. Just hearing a figure or a number for the general public, they don't see the value in that, whereas I think we need to do better at doing that. I don't know who does it and how they do it, but I'd love to see it. And essentially the podcast is about things like that, talking about it. So hopefully someone far more experienced, far more connected than I am, maybe that will start a fire under them to take action and maybe do some of those things, because you're completely right. There's not enough information from our side. So that's something we need to address as a whole. All right, guys, just thank you very much for having me. Really appreciate it. When Rick reached out, I said, I don't know why anyone would want to hear from me. I'm not a good hunter by any stretch of the imagination, but I really appreciate the opportunity to come in and have a chat. So thank you.
If you have a topic, guest, question, or any gear that you want to hear about on the podcast, shoot us an email, australianhuntingandbeyond@gmail.com. Alternatively, find us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. All the links are in the show notes. If you haven't already, make sure you give us a review and subscribe to our podcast on whatever platform you're listening on. Thanks for joining us, and we'll catch you next time.